It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the undaunted John Hersey and the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably John Hersey. How you doing this morning, John?
Wicked good, as we New Englanders say. How are you doing today?
I'm ready to rock and roll. They say no rest for the wicked. So I think you know George Washington Carver, our subject for today, doesn't sound like he took a lot of rest in his life. So why should we?
Absolutely. Yeah, you struggled through bigotry and poverty and health issues to become what Henry Ford said was one of the greatest scientists of his era.
Yeah, he was born into slavery in Kansas. The historians don't even know for sure what his birthday was. 1864 is the one that I'm going with, but I've seen various dates. 1864 to 1943. What Carver went through just to get an education makes him it's extraordinary. It makes him a hero in and of its own right. Never mind, that he goes on to these great agriculture, these great accomplishments in agricultural science at Tuskegee Institute. Talk about somebody being dauntless. This is he's a real inspiration. What he went through to get an education, the obstacles he overcame. In fact, Lawrence Eliot wrote a biography of Carver, George Washington, the man who overcame, which is a perfect subtitle for Carver's story. And John, I should mention, I just happened to have a copy by accident here of my book on heroes.
Heroes, legends,
Heroes,
champions. Why heroism
right?
matters.
Right, and it starts out with several stories from which I induce the principles of heroism. Well, and Carver is one of them. Carver is one, and the three real life heroes. One fictional is Shane, who we could discuss. Shane is a great hero, but the three real life heroes: Maria Montessori, George Washington Carver, and Ernest Shackleton. We have now covered the waterfront on the Hero Show, with Carver being the third of the three to be discussed here, and eminently worthy. I mean, I guess we should start at the beginning, because what he went through in his life and overcame is really it's astonishing. It really shows you his spirit and the potential of the human spirit.
Yeah, right from the outset, he was born into slavery, as you said. To he was owned by here scare quotes Moses
Right.
Carver, and while he was still an infant, he and his mother were stolen by night raiders, stolen from their home there, in slavery, but to be sold into slavery again somewhere else in the deep South. And Moses Carver, a German immigrant to America, hires somebody to go out and retrieve them, the both of them. And unfortunately, they're only able to retrieve George. He comes back and he's nearly dead with whooping cough and very, very ill. And he never sees his mother again.
Right. Yeah, that's really sad. Sad beginning. Never to see his mother again. Kidnapped by racist night riders. Yeah, that probably going to sell him down the river. In the deep South, where was the worst. Where was the worst. Slavery was the harshest in this country. So he was fortunate to escape that. But interesting thing is, Moses and Susan Carver sound like they were really good people, John. They raised this young black child as though he were their own son, and
Yeah.
educated him as best they could. They were simple people, probably religious. Some, I'm guessing, probably devout Christians of one denomination or another. They certainly introduced George Carver to Christianity. He became a devoutly religious. But they educated him as best they could. They were farmers, and Moses and Susan Carver, and they loved him. They loved him. They gave like their own son. So he was one uh, in a lifetime of overcoming obstacles and misfortunes. There was one break for him. His adopted parents were really good people, and he learned early then that skin color doesn't matter. There are people who think it does, obviously, but they're mistaken. And he learned that from his adopted parents and from his study of nature. He loved wandering in the woods and studying the plants and the flowers and everything. And like he said at one point, there were roses. Some are red, and some are some are yellow, and some are lavender, and some are white, but they're all roses, right? And so color means little or nothing. So he learned that early on, a good lesson, valuable lesson, in several different forms.
Yeah, and he was a precocious kid, just an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. And his adopted mother, he called her Aunt Susan, taught him reading and writing. But it was one of the things, like you said, he was very interested in nature, and he would at times tear up if he was tramping through the wilderness and accidentally stepped on a flower or something, or perhaps broke a plant as he was trying to move it from one place to another. But he was known for being able to revive plants that were, on their way out. And people would bring plants to him from all over the place. And in time, he became, even in childhood, he became known as the plant doctor. But they were pretty isolated. I mean, not only did he not see and know a lot of other black people, he didn't see or know a lot of other white people. And so racism, I mean, he had an early experience with it, of course, but one theme that stands out to me in Carver's life is his ability, just his intelligence, his impressiveness as a person. He was able to bring the best out of people despite the bigotry of the day, despite these terrible prejudices, and so that enabled him to open up many doors and to push past many barriers that others of his color weren't able to.
Yeah, he had this undying optimism about him, and a goodwill. He certainly wasn't a racist, and he ended up befriending a lot of whites as well as blacks in his life, and always his, not just his genius. That's rare enough, but combined with his indomitable determination, to get an education it's really extraordinary. And it reminds me, John, one of the heroes we've done on this show, the I like to think of him as immortal, the immortal Thomas Sowell, who's going to be 91 this year, and I hope he has many more years of good health to come. In one, I think my favorite Thomas Sowell book, and I've read about a dozen of his books. You would need a long time to read all of his books. I mean, I don't remember how many he's published, but it's dozens. But Ethnic America, where Thomas Sowell discusses the history of all the different ethnic groups in the United States, which is fascinating. And I think it was published in the early 1980s, as I recall. But he's talking about how today there are, there's these instances of a lot of black kids in the hood who don't want an education, and they think that's for white people or it's for Asians, but it's not for blacks. That was Thomas Sowell writing in the early 1980s. I think that's tragically, I think that's more widespread, in some of the black urban neighborhoods today. But Thomas Sowell pointed out how sad it is, how tragic it is, given the struggle of black Americans in the past to get an education. What some black Americans had to go through to get an education. Booker T. Washington, soon to be George Washington Carver's boss at Tuskegee Institute, is one example. But Carver too. The struggle to get an education was simply monumental. We need to discuss it because I think it's heroic in and of itself. He wants to get. He's thirsting for knowledge. Brilliant young kid, precocious, like you said. He's waiting, for the day that he can go he sit outside the local schoolhouse, listening when he's very little, listening to kids recite their lessons, yearning for the day when he could be in school. He asked his uncle Moses Carver, when will I be old enough to attend school? And it's just heartbreaking, for both of them. Poor Moses Carver, who loves this child. How do you crush, a kid's dream gently? He'll never be able to go to this school the local school or any school for white children. And it's so sad, and when he tells the young child, young George is dumbfounded. What does color have to do with the thirst for knowledge or the ability to learn? Like I was saying before, the roses come in all different colors, but they're all roses. And so there's his second taste of racial bigotry in his life, but that doesn't deter, or maybe it deters him, but it certainly doesn't stop him, does it?
No, it never takes no for an answer. Lucky
Yeah.
for posterity. He
Right.
couldn't go to the local school, so he decided to make it on his own. He tramped off 8 miles away to Neosho, Missouri, and there he met Mariah Watkins. And he told her pretty much right off the bat, I want to learn what makes hail and fire, and I want to learn, whether or not flowers can be caused to be different colors by changing something about the seeds. And she told him, well, I don't think you're going to learn that here. You might be able to learn that in Kansas City, but you might not even be able to learn it there. But she had no doubt that he would one day go on to find answers to his questions. And so he spent several years living here in Neosho and attending school and taking on a few odd jobs here and there. But Mariah Watkins was really important. Like several people in his life, she reinforced his thirst for knowledge. And she told him something to the effect of, go out and get this knowledge so that you can benefit yourself and benefit people. And that's what he did.
Right. Mariah Watkins recognized his genius and his determination, as did his Uncle Moses and Aunt Susan. So it's when you're very young like that, or at any age, it's certainly great to have somebody in your corner, who recognizes you and encourages you, helps fuel his steely will, to keep going. So you're right. So in fact, that's a great story. I discussed that briefly in Heroes, Legends, Champions. But she says all the time, I knew he'd find it out somewhere. Even if he had to be the one who identified it himself, then gaining new knowledge, she was confident he'd find it out somewhere. So he hitches a ride on a wagon to Fort Scott, Kansas, which had been a hotbed of Southern sympathizers during the Civil War, and still had a strong anti-black prejudice. There was one when he was a very tall, bony, very, very skinny teenager, and he would work odd jobs, he'd buy books, and then he got accosted one day by several white men who were racist, and they knocked his books to the ground, and they stole his books, because they say in their ignorant view, blacks shouldn't get an education. And then also in Fort Scott, he saw some poor black guy being killed by these racist thugs burned him to death in a roaring bonfire in the town square. Nobody interceded, not civilians or lawmen, and that would make any good person sick to their stomach. And George Carver fled Fort Scott, Kansas, and he roamed the American West for 10 years after that, performing odd jobs, looking to make enough money to buy books, to get a few snatches of time where he could go to school, and continue his education. And finally, where was that? In Minneapolis, Kansas. I didn't know there was a Minneapolis, Kansas, but he had a laundry business of his own. He was able to attend a legitimate high school, and in the mid 1880s, when he was in his early 20s, he was finally able to graduate from high school.
Yeah,
All right.
1885, graduates from high school, gets his degree, and there's kind of a funny story about his middle initial. It's here in Minneapolis, Kansas, that he encounters another George Carver. And so in order to head off any confusion, he decides to add the middle initial W to his name. And somebody asks him, is that for Washington? And he said, yeah, why not? but he never used, it's funny, we refer to him as George Washington Carver now, but he never used Washington spelt out in any of his, he'd go on to write a newspaper column and write all sorts of pamphlets for farmers. And he always spelt it just George W. Carver. But that supposedly is why he adopted the middle initial.
Well, it fits. George Washington was a hero, and George Washington Carver is certainly a hero. We could, but I think we could shorten that, just call him George Carver, even though became famous as George Washington Carver. But then another sad story is when he gets, it seems to start off auspiciously. He's accepted into college, in Highland College, in Kansas, and this sounds this sounds good. Sounds good. He spends that summer, learning typing skills. He works as a telegrapher, which sounds familiar, right? Having done we did Thomas Edison, on the Hero Show, and they're contemporaries in late 19th century, early 20th century, in innovativeness and inventiveness. In fact, if I remember correctly, John, I think Edison was so impressed with Carver's work that he offered to hire him, to work in his lab. I think offered him a large amount of money, like $100,000 a year is the figure that sticks in my mind, which a lot of money back then. I don't know how much that's worth today, but a lot. And Carver turned him down to continue. Gratefully turned him down to continue his work at Tuskegee. But anyhow, so Highland College. So after, as the fall term nears, he's working. He finished his typing courses in Kansas. It was in Kansas City, right? I've written down. Yeah, Kansas City. He takes a train to Joplin. He gives up his job as a telegrapher. He takes a train. He says goodbye to his good friend Mariah Watkins. He walks miles to see, Uncle Moses. Aunt Susan is ailing by this time. She probably doesn't have much time left, but there's a very tearful, reunion with his adopted parents. And think about it. This is in the 1880s, John. This is not all that long ago, but there was no form of communication. There's not even a telephone. Never mind. I'll send them a text or an email. But yeah, you got to go walk to see his adopted parents, and then he's off to Highland College, and the Reverend Duncan Brown is the headmaster there. And when they meet face to face, the headmaster tells him, or the president of the college tells him, "You didn't tell me you were Negro. Highland College does not take Negroes."
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Once again,
God. I mean, that's so sad. Given the struggle that Carver had gone through to get to this point, the years and years of tramping the West, working odd jobs, trying to save money, buy books, snatch enough time to go to school. If anybody earned his way into college, it was Carver, and now he's going to be denied after he's such a high. I mean, college now finally, like, goal achieved, and to be denied, and on the basis of not because he's illiterate, or he's not a good student, or he's a partier or flunks out or something like that. No, he's a brilliant student and as hard a worker as anybody will ever meet. But no, he's got too much melanin in his skin to go to college. I mean, it's so irrational, and it's just heartbreaking. But if the bad guys thought they were going to stop George Carver with this kind of rejection, they didn't know who they were dealing with, did they?
Right. Yeah, it's heartbreaking for us, but he wasn't heartbroken. He didn't let it stop him, at least. He, following year, establishes a homestead in Kansas, builds a sod hut, and manually plows 17 acres of land, plants his own crops. He's there for a while, but within a couple of years, he moves on to another town in Kansas and befriends a prominent couple there. And they encourage him to go to school, to try going to college there instead. So he enrolls and gets into Simpson College. And he'd always loved, I mean, he was, like we said, precocious and had lots of different interests. And one of them was art. And
Hmm.
he didn't have any sort of portfolio. So the art instructor, Etta Budd, was pretty, she was unsure of whether even to let him in, but she does. And it turns out that, like most things that he tried, he was excellent at painting. He, in fact, painted a yucca plant that he would go on to win an award for in the Chicago World's Fair. But even with that talent, she knows that art is an incredibly hard field, even for a white person to succeed in. And so she encourages him to pursue his secondary passion, which is agriculture. And she just happens to have a father who teaches agriculture at Iowa State, and so she encourages him to enroll in agriculture at Iowa State, and he does.
Right. Right. This story reminds me again of one of our other heroes, Shackleton's famous line: "Obstacles are just things to be overcome." Right. Well, no, well, Shackleton certainly lived that out, but George Carver maybe even more so. Yeah, he catches a few breaks. That it was, I think, it was outside Des Moines where he met that. It was in church because he was a devout Christian, where he met the local doctor and his wife, who told him about Simpson College, which is a Methodist school, and that was created on the principle that all men are created equal. So they didn't discriminate, against students because of skin color. So I don't remember how many miles he had to walk to get to Simpson College, but one of the professors, I got a great quote here. A professor wrote of him, quote, this is in Indianola, Iowa. "He came to Indianola with a satchel full of poverty and a burning zeal to know everything," unquote. Well,
That's great.
it shows. Yeah, it is, and it shows that although poverty is a hardship, it's a bad thing. It's not the worst thing that can befall somebody to be poor. The burning zeal to know everything overcame that, the driving him to work hard, to excel, as a student at Simpson College, and then to get, like you said, get accepted at what was Iowa? It wasn't Iowa State yet. What was it called back then? The Iowa State Agricultural College, later to
Mm-hmm.
become Iowa State University in Ames. I've been to Iowa State. I've lectured there, and I know what kind of an agricultural program they have. As you wouldn't be surprising in Iowa. And late 19th century, turn of the 20th century, Iowa State. We think, we're a couple of northeastern guys, John, New York, Boston, Iowa, that's flyover country, we a couple of snobs, but 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 Iowa State, or the school that was to become Iowa State, had maybe the world's leading agricultural program at the time, with a number of brilliant, and not just brilliant, but revolutionary thinkers in the field of agricultural science. So it chokes me up when, this is the perfect place for George Carver. And here I wrote in Heroes, Legends, Champions about this. Around the turn of the 20th century, there is nowhere in the world an agricultural institution better stocked with brilliant minds, experimental methods, and revolutionary ideas than the sprawling campus in Ames, Iowa. Finally, the agricultural prodigy had been welcomed into the scientific promised land. And so, yeah, it's very touching. And you were absolutely right. Carver was as talented. Evidently, he was as talented as an artist as he was as a scientist. He was a prodigiously talented, multi-talented individual. He becomes the first black student at the school that will eventually become Iowa State University. First to he gains a bachelor's and a master's degree in the 1890s, I think, in agriculture. Right, I think was his.
Yep.
Yeah.
And,
In 1896, he
and
graduates, gets his master's degree. 1896.
and not only is he the first to enroll, first to graduate, he's also the first black person to be welcomed to the Iowa State faculty. And so he becomes a teacher there, and begins passing on his wisdom. And this is another great skill of his. It's not just he's good in the lab and he knows his test tubes and he knows his chemicals really well. He's a tremendous conveyor of ideas, and he would go on to just gain these huge crowds at Tuskegee, as we'll talk about soon. But here, as he's still a student, one of the notable agricultural professors at his school says that Carver was just a brilliant student, and he was the greatest scientific observer that he had ever known. So, uh, it's incredible, really, what he's come from to be here, and it hasn't his spirits haven't flagged. He's able to be there fully and to give it his all, and support himself at the same time.
Yeah. Another hero that we'll discuss in the fullness of time on this show, the great steel producer Andrew Carnegie, who came out of terrible poverty himself to become, one of the wealthiest men in the world at the turn of the 20th century, overcame all kinds of obstacles to achieve that. Carnegie said famously that a sunny disposition is the most important, quality to have in life, which Carnegie certainly did. And you see it in Carver. There's this sanguine outlook on life, this undying, unquenchable optimism that no matter what I have to go through, I'm going to make this turn out well in the end. And if you have that spirit and you live in a semi-free country, then the sky's the limit. You can certainly, for both of them at the turn of the 20th century, Carnegie sells Carnegie Steel to a consortium headed by J.P. Morgan, may have been the wealthiest man in the world at that time. Although I think Rockefeller probably was. Maybe he's only the second wealthiest man in the world at that point. What a slacker, right? And Carver goes on to these extraordinary achievements at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, of all places, which we should. Not that I want to, sound like a northern bigot on the assumption that everybody in Alabama was a racist. I know that claim is false. But Tuskegee Institute, Booker T. Washington, one of the greatest educators this country has ever seen, and another guy who'll be on the Hero Show in the fullness, in the fullness of time, who himself, went through this terrible struggle to get an education, also recognizes Carver's genius and wants him to work to research and teach at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, which Booker T. Washington is in the process of building up into a thriving, college for black students. And Carver, late 1890s, Carver joins the faculty at Tuskegee Institute, and he remains there until his death in 1943. So he's a long tenure, at Tuskegee Institute. Long outlives his own boss. I don't remember what year Booker T. Washington died, but it was long before that. I think it was in World War One. There you go, World War One, 1915. And Carver, in World War II, dies in 1943. So, but and their relationship was rocky at times, but Carver has a long, glorious run at Tuskegee Institute.
And we've got to talk about Washington's invitation to Carver to come teach there. This is a beautiful letter that he wrote to him. And he said something to the effect of, well, I can't offer you wealth or position or fame. When you get here, your laboratory will have to be in your head. But in place of these things, I offer you work, hard work, the job of taking a people who is devastated by poverty and oppression and turning them into full men, bringing them up to full manhood. And so, Carver sets out to Alabama, the deep South. He's already left and had, basically said good riddance, but he decides to go back. And his sole piece of lab equipment is a microscope that he was given by his colleagues at Iowa State when he leaves. He shows up, no lab. He and his students have to go to the trash heaps and scavenge for things that they can use to build their laboratory. And over time they're resourceful. They do. And Booker T. Washington, as you said, is just a hero, a tremendous hero. He taught hard work and moral character, the means of success. And it was one of the school's policy that nothing we can make, we shall buy. We're going to make everything that we can. So he taught all sorts of trades there, the art of making bricks, construction. And so the students essentially built the school and supplied it with everything that they needed. And the lab included in that.
Right. And Booker T and the MGs. John, you remember them?
Yeah.
The band? Yeah. Well, Booker T was certainly famous. He believed that the nations, more than through academic education, and so that's what they focused on at Tuskegee. But at the same time, Booker T. Washington used his fame to raise money from northern philanthropists, some of Rockefeller's executives, and he was able to build thousands of schools, thousands of elementary schools, throughout the Deep South to educate young black students. And one of the results from that down the road was an educated intellectual cadre of black leaders, one of whom, decades later, Martin Luther King, of course, helped spearhead the civil rights movement. But that's another story for another day when we get to when we do a show on Booker T. Washington. So, but Carver, the subject for today. Carver, of course, working, teaching, and also, of course, doing research in agricultural science, which is his specialty. So,
yeah. At this time, cotton was the cash crop, and cotton saps nitrogen from the soil, and it just wears the soil out. But these sharecroppers didn't really know any better, and so they just again and again, year after year, same plot, same crop, and they were just wearing the soil out. And so Carver knew enough to know that there were certain crops like sweet potatoes, peanuts, soybeans, black-eyed peas, things that you could plant that would actually replenish the soil. And so he taught them, he advocated that they begin rotating their crops and doing some of these different crops instead. And not only were they good to sell, but they're good to eat. So you can plant these things and consume them yourself. There's a lot of resistance. We talked about Norman Borlaug a few weeks back, and there was great resistance from farmers to plant his new strains. Same thing here. Carver ran into great resistance, and people did not want to plant these crops. But in 1915, boll weevil made its way up from Mexico all the way up to Alabama and just began devastating cotton crops. And so people were more or less forced to take on different crops, try different things. And soon people had lots and lots and lots of peanuts and various things. And they didn't really know what to do with them. Some of them were rotting in the fields because there wasn't that great a market for it. And so Carver sets out to discover and catalog all the various uses of peanuts. It's just one of his missions. This is the one I think he's best known for. Yeah.
Like peanut butter, right? Making possible peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for millions of elementary school children, across the country. I'm just making that up. I assume that peanut butter was one of the developments of this. Is that right? Do you know?
Well, he popularized. He certainly, that was part of it. One of the ideas he cataloged, and he's commonly credited with creating peanut butter, but actually it was patented several decades before, a while before. Somebody else invented peanut butter, but this is he came up with 300 over the course of his lifetime, 300 different uses of peanuts. And of course, peanut butter was on that list. But
so he's the guy He's the guy who popularized peanut butter. Then is it correct to say that?
Perhaps, I'm not sure.
Okay, all right. I'm not either. I'm just guessing. I just know I like peanut butter. So
I
I
had some
thank.
today.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So I thank whoever it was who originally patented it, peanut butter, and Carver for all his work with peanuts and sweet potatoes as leading crops. And you're right, the boll weevil sound it was devastating to the cotton crops. There was a boll weevil's a type of beetle, right? And it eats the cotton crops. And it was many years before scientists figured out how to eliminate that pest. But for several reasons, the Carver's emphasis on crop rotation, was really important. The what one is the boll weevil killing the cotton crops, but even aside from that, you already mentioned the cotton saps the soil, and these legumes helps replenish the soil. And so he's one of the scientists who popularized the principle of the importance of crop rotation, and of course that was an enormous boon for southern farmers, both white and black. And that's I think one of his greatest achievements is to help people realize the importance of rotating your crops and not just planting the same crop every year after year after year.
Yeah, he wrote a lot of pamphlets trying to educate these southern sharecroppers about their what they should and shouldn't do. But it became pretty clear that many of these sharecroppers, of course, were illiterate. They couldn't read these pamphlets; they're no good to them. So he invited them to come to the farm at Tuskegee Institute and to participate in some activities so that he could show them how to better manage their land. And for many, they couldn't make the trip, or they weren't convinced that it was worth it. So, with the help of Morris Jessup, a philanthropist, he put together the Jessup wagons, and he said that this was his greatest achievement. It was basically a mobile laboratory and classroom, and he would show up at a sharecropper's hut, and he would he would walk them through different processes and practices to enable them to get more out of their soil, to produce greater crops, get more money, and live a better life. And so he thought that
Right.
this was his greatest achievement,
The Jessup
bringing the
wagon. Right.
knowledge to the people in the Jessup wagon. Yeah.
Well, that's a good phrase, John. John, bringing knowledge to the people. That is a noble endeavor, and you touched upon something important too. Sometimes people cling to their ignorance. They don't want they don't want the innovation. They don't want the revolutionary idea. We've been doing it this way all our life. Well, it doesn't work anymore. Well, yeah, but this is what we're used to. You know, what was there was some psychologist, some psychotherapist, I forget his name offhand, who said, the devil we know is better than the devil we don't, or even better than no devil at all. Which is there's real wisdom and insight in that. And so Carver had to combat this kind of ignorance, and bring knowledge to the people is often very arduous task. And we should give some credit to Morris Ketchum Jessup. That's Jesup. That Carver named the Jessup wagon after, because he funded it. He was a New York financier, one of those evil capitalists, of course, who just that's the Marxist, that's the Marxist legend, of course, Marxist mythology, I should say. But Jessup was a New York financier, and he put money into this to fund the program of bringing knowledge to the people, like you so aptly called it. And so Carver honored him by calling it the Jessup wagon. Yeah, he traipsed all over. He traipsed all over the South, bringing his wisdom, in this field to poor farmers, and being a non-racist and an anti-bigot himself. He shared his wisdom ecumenically. White farmers, black farmers, whatever. He was enormously helpful in that way. And speaking of being opposed to bigotry, he spoke. It's fascinating to me. This is like in the 1920s. This is a Jim Crow era. Is brutal. I mean, I can remember from when I was a kid. In the heyday of the civil rights movement, the the George Wallace was governor of Alabama, and Lester Maddox in Georgia, and they were just brutal towards Black Americans, and restricted blacks from voting. Just unleashed brutality on Martin Luther King and the civil rights marchers. Medgar Evers, and was murdered was in Mississippi. Was a U.S. Army World War II vet. Was a hero. But it's interesting. Carver was speaking at these white colleges in the Deep South during the Jim Crow era on racial amity. Uh, so you can see there's hope. Some of the white folk in the Deep South were not committed to Jim Crow and lynchings and the Klan and this brutally enforced segregation, and invited Carver to speak. At a number through the 1920s at a number of Southern universities, white schools. So he's speaking to what since the South was segregated until the 1950s and 1960s. He's speaking all to white students here on the virtues of racial harmony. So again, somebody who's engaged in very noble activities, spreading knowledge here in the humanities on ethical issues, as well as in the sciences on agricultural issues, spreading wisdom, bringing wisdom to the people. I like your phrase.
Yeah, he's really pushing the boundaries here. He's really cutting edge in terms of interrace relations, I guess you'd call it. But he also got some criticism for not speaking out more against racism and against the various laws that were still in the books. But he said, if I used my energy trying to right every wrong done me, I'd have none left for my work. And he was very dedicated to his work, and he saw his work as a moral mission, as a means of helping people. Like Booker T. Washington, both of these guys were focused not on attacking a disvalue, not on attacking a negative, but on promoting a positive. They saw that the best means forward was to help people better themselves and just become these, as Frederick Douglass would put it, self-made men. And
Right.
so,
Right.
This Carver's lecture tours, both on science, on scientific issues, on racial issues, sort of into one of the great Black celebrities. And he's known just in this country, but abroad. And, you've got crown princes coming to study under him at Tuskegee Institute, to learn his ways and just to learn from his wisdom. He's honored by several presidents, and goes on to be honored not only by the NAACP, but by the Daughters of the Confederacy. So, how many guys can you say that about?
Daughters, I didn't know that. Daughters of the Confederacy. All right. Well, give some credit to the Daughters of the Confederacy in that case, because the Confederacy was committed to slavery, to race-based slavery. So maybe the daughters of the Confederacy generation had learned something and learned better. So give them some credit here for moving forward, on racial issues. But John, we're a couple of die-hard, inveterate objectivists. So we're egoists, and we understand that and promote the idea that a person should do in life what he or she loves, something that's constructive, productive, something that you love. And Carver loved science, and this is what he loved. He certainly could have used his celebrity status to speak out more against Jim Crow laws and fight that political battle, but politics wasn't what he loved. So I'm not going to criticize him for that. He made these advances in science. He filled his life with what he loved, as well as speaking out on racial issues on these university tours. And we should point out here that his former boss, Booker T, who was gone by this time, believed that the way forward for Black Americans was to to gain practical skills, to have a strong work ethic, work honestly, and productively as part of American society. And the better people amongst white Americans would recognize this as, these our prejudicial view that blacks are lazy and they don't want to work was just irrational. It was wrong, and that was a way forward to improving race relations and improving the lot of Black Americans. That was Booker T. Washington's view, and I think George Washington Carver, at least to some degree, shared it and and lived it out. And his work in we should point out that how inspirational his work was. When you achieve at that level as one of the greatest agricultural scientists of history, and you become famous for it, you become an inspiration. Any number of he was the leading Black scientist, of the early 20th century, and he inspired a number of Black kids to want to to study science, to go into the sciences. And when you're a role model like that, it's not limited to members of the same race that you are. How many white kids were inspired by Carver? How many women, young women were inspired? When you see somebody overcome these kinds of obstacles to reach enormous achievements, it's very inspiring, and that's a big part of Carver's legacy. And it's ecumenical; it cuts across racial boundaries and either gender. The practical value of his work, all of us, we take for granted as Americans, we're proudly the fattest people of history, But we walk into an American supermarket, it's unbelievable. It's a cornucopia of foodstuffs, and Carver is one of those giants who made that possible. The field of agricultural science is a big part of what made that possible, and Carver is a giant in that field. So the practical benefits are enormous. And then secondly, what the second great benefit that he was, wrote about this in Heroes, Legends, Champions. The second great benefit is the inspirational value, and Carver certainly reached that at a very high level. And before I get to the epitaph on his tombstone, which I think is very beautiful, very fitting, and very moving, I want to put in a plug again. You mentioned Henry Ford at the outset, John, and I keep bringing this up on the Hero Show, but I think it's worthy. Ford's museum in the Detroit suburbs, Greenfield Village. He has Carver's cabin, that he grew up in. I've been there. I don't want to misspeak. I think it's the original. I can ask
I think it's a
my sister.
rebuilt. I read that
What's
it's
that?
somewhere that it was rebuilt. It was like a
Oh,
replica of
it's a
the
replica.
cabin he was.
Okay. So it's not the original. Like Ford has Edison's original laboratory from Menlo Park, and he's got the Wright brothers' original, bicycle shop with their lab in the back at Greenfield Village. But with Carver's cabin, it's a replica. Okay, good. Thank you for pointing that out. But it's there at the Henry Ford Museum at Greenfield Village for anybody to go see all these. It's just I strongly recommend it. My sister Amy Naser, my adopted sister, their family, me, Robert and Amy Naser, and she's worked there for many years, and whenever I'm out there visiting, let's go to the Greenfield Village, and it's this almost encyclopedic place of American heroes, in technology and agriculture and applied science and everything. So yeah, okay. So thanks for the clarification. The replicate of Carver's original cabin in Kansas, you can find it there at Ford's Museum in Greenfield Village outside Detroit. So it's just quite a
One more
story. Should
thing.
we go ahead?
Yeah, well, one more tidbit on Carver as this role model, an inspiration, and fount of wisdom. Um, he didn't just teach science. He also he like Booker T was very concerned with the moral development, the character development of his students. And I just want to read a few of the, I guess you would call them proverbs, if you will, the virtues that he taught his students. He said, "Be clean, both inside and out. Neither look up to the rich nor down on the poor. Lose if need be without squealing. Win without bragging. Always be considerate of women, children, and older people. Be too brave to lie. Be too generous to cheat. Take your share of the world and let others take theirs." There's so much wisdom here. And Carver
Yeah.
never had kids. In fact, he said, somebody asked him, why did you never marry? And he said, well, what woman would want a man who's forever dropping soil specimens all over her parlor? And how could I explain to a wife why I have to go out? How could I explain to a woman why I have to go out every morning at 4 o'clock to speak to flowers? She wouldn't understand. But he received letters from tens of thousands of farmers, and many of his students wrote to him as well, and they referred to him as dad, and he referred to them as sons. And he had this great bond with these people that he had helped, not only just economically, not only to help them find opportunity, but also just to build their character and become better people, more successful people in life. And so this is one of the things, this is part of the legacy that would live on after his death.
John, it reminds me of another one of our heroes, Benjamin Franklin, with his, Franklin's in his autobiography so brilliantly and courageously, with great integrity, pursued the strengthening of his own character. He really worked at it, and you could see, that same fervor for character development in Carver, both in himself and in his students, who like you said, were like his children. And I remember I was reading his those exhortations, those urgings, his principles last night. I was really impressed with that. What was it? Be too courageous to lie, and be too generous to cheat. Yeah, those are noble. Those are noble words. And it's interesting. Carver was a bachelor, but he did have a relationship with a teacher. Was Sarah Hunt? I think, was that her name? I can't remember. I don't want to misquote here. But evidently they really loved each other. But he was just wedded to his work. It was 4 o'clock in the morning.
He courted her for a while, but then apparently she moved to California to take a teaching job. So things didn't work out.
Yeah, I think it was, from what I've read. I'm certainly, I'm getting this from Lawrence Elliott's book. George Washington Carver, the man who overcame. He was simply wedded to his work, and so he could not be, in a committed relationship like that. And I think so. She moved. She moved away. But so that part of his life, to me anyway, wasn't fulfilled. But that doesn't mean he wasn't fulfilled. He certainly had a rich life, in his career and his relationships with his students, like you said. And I love the epitaph. He's buried at Tuskegee alongside Booker T. Washington, right? As I recall.
Yeah, he donated a ton of money, 60 grand, which is apparently more than $1 million today, to fund the foundation and agricultural research at Tuskegee. And he was buried there.
I was reading last night. I was like, I knew that inflation had been enormous over the last, 100 years or so. Well, that's less than 100 years from the 1940s. $60,000 in 1940s is worth over $1 million today. I mean, that is
gotta check those numbers. That might not be right. That might not. Maybe that is, but probably something worth double checking.
That's astonishing. No, it may be. It may be, because I remember, I've got a number of examples of this. One from Thomas Sowell, from a different, economist, from a brilliant economist, from a different standpoint, pointing out that, if you were saving, and you were young and saving in 1970, how severely diminished in purchasing power that money is today, 40 or 50 years later. So the government expansion of the money supply has been severe. But another example, John, from another one of our heroes that we discussed was Rockefeller, who, earlier in the 20th century, around the time of World War I, was a billionaire. I don't remember exactly, 1 billion or 2 billion, but he's considered the wealthiest man in history in terms of purchasing power. That's worth 400 billion today. What I was reading, more than double the wealthiest men in the world, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who are both they're slackers. They're only worth like 180 billion in today's today's money. So that may be accurate, or something in that ballpark anyhow. But yeah, he was he his commitment to science extended even beyond his death. He left it. He was very frugal. He took his paychecks. What did he say once? When in response to making more money, and probably including Edison's generous offer to work for him, Carver said something like, "What do I need the money for when I already have all the earth?" his his values. To me, I would want the money because I can, have a nicer car, or a better home. I can finance my daughter's tuition, but Carver's values did not extend so much to those kinds of things. They're good things, but they weren't his values. His values was working with the plants, the flowers. He was a plant doctor, working the soil, and that's what he lived and loved. Saved his money, and then continued even after he was gone. His passion for science, like you said, he donated it to scientific research at Tuskegee Institute, and his epitaph is just perfect. Let me read it from Heroes, Legends, Champions. The epitaph on his tombstone at Tuskegee reads, quote, "He could have added fortune to fame, but caring for neither, he found happiness and honor in being helpful to the world," unquote. George Washington Carver's epitaph, and that reminds me. I keep liking to tie this to our other heroes. What Westinghouse, the great George Westinghouse said, and they at least they show it in the movie. I don't know if he ever said it in real life or not, but he said it in the movie, the current war. And as I'm fond of saying, if this story ain't true, it ought to be. Westinghouse evidently said, "If you want to be famous, shoot a president." By the way, I don't advocate that, not even the current one. Don't shoot anybody. But Westinghouse making a point. If you want to be famous, shoot a president. But if you want what I consider a legacy, leave the world a better place than you found it. And Carver's achievements, like Westinghouse's and Tesla's and Edison's, Carver's achievements certainly left the world a better place than he found it. Human life, food is important. I don't know how many people have starved to death historically, John, in famines, around the world and everything, and still do in the non-capitalist world. But Carver's contributions to agricultural science enabled us to grow, more food, and of course sustain more lives. Like the Green Revolution guy, Norman Borlaug. Well, I shouldn't call him the Green Revolution guy. The Green Revolution genius, Norman Borlaug, helped to create enormously larger quantities of foodstuffs to sustain human life. So Carver certainly left the world a better place that he found it. Right? I mean, the good is that which promotes human life. Ayn Rand taught brilliantly, and by that principle, Carver was very, very, very good and great, rolled up into one.
Absolutely. Well, let's just leave everyone with a quote here. Carver had many good ones, but let me just pick from these. So he said, "There's no shortcut to achievement. Life requires thorough preparation. Veneer isn't worth anything." So much like Frederick Douglass, work, 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 work. That's how you make a good life for yourself.
It's a leitmotif that runs through a lot of our heroes. Frederick Douglass, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington Carver, there's three right off the top of our heads, right, who are very, very clear that work ethic is an enormously important virtue in having a good life. Franklin stresses it, of course, in his autobiography, industriousness, right? Strong work ethic. And that is the way, at least in a semi-free country. If you're living under the Nazis or the communists, as all in a totalitarian state, then uh, you may end up being killed, murdered by the state. But in a free country or semi-free country, there's nothing like that kind of industriousness, and you can advance, and that's the way to live out Shackleton's famous observation: and obstacles are just things to be overcome. After all, work ethic, an indomitable work ethic. And Carver certainly exemplifies it, as did Benjamin Franklin and Frederick Douglass. So I think we should salute the great George Washington Carver. And I'm going to wish you, John, to have a more heroic day, have a heroic upcoming weekend. And everybody out there in Hero Land, live a more heroic life. We'll see you next week on The Hero Show.